Hey everybody, I'm Kevin.
And I'm Kayla.
We love movies.
And talking about them.
This is a very special episode of the Martini Window. Today, on the day after seeing a double feature that has been completely taking over the internet, we are here to talk about the phenomenon known as Barbenheimer, a current phenomenon that just had its opening weekend. And might I say, both these movies were fantastic. We don't have any guests on today's episode, but we have Kayla and I to talk about our experiences going to the double feature, that is Barbenheimer. Kayla, would you like to start?
Both of these movies were amazing. I am very glad we did the only correct order to do this in, as in Oppenheimer first and Barbie second.
So there are going to be spoilers for both Barbie and Oppenheimer here. We'll try to keep it as light as we can. People still haven't seen the movie. This episode is really more so about the current phenomenon, the double feature. Anybody who saw the double feature, elements about the movie for sure. There'll be light spoilers in this episode, but not full spoilers. How does that sound?
I think that sounds fair.
I think a light spoiler is Oppenheimer built the atomic bomb. I don't think that's a big spoiler.
I think that's just world history.
It's kind of like, I watched Titanic years ago. Someone spoiled to me the ending. I was like,
I had someone spoil the ending to Saw for me. I've never gotten over that.
In late 2020, the world was in a different place. The world had shut down. There was a virus taking over, and Christopher Nolan had decided to release a movie in theaters at a time where no one said it was a smart idea. That movie was Tenet, which eventually led to the breakup between Christopher Nolan and Warner Brothers. Pair that up with Warner Brothers' choice at the time to release all their 2021 catalog on HBO Max, and it set us up for where we are today. Nolan took his next movie, which was going to be a biopic of the creator of the atomic bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the aforementioned Oppenheimer, and he was going to take this to rival studios. The result being Universal coming out on the highest bid for Oppenheimer, which Warner Brothers took personally.
Yes. And then Warner Brothers greenlit the Barbie movie.
Which I want to point out, too, there's even a history behind that.
Yes.
The Barbie movie started out as what probably would have ended up being a rather standard comedy. It had Amy Schumer in the lead. I can't remember who that had directing. I think it was Tim Story. I'm not certain. But it was an Amy Schumer flick at the time. She leaves the movie. Margot Robbie's company, Lucky Chap Entertainment, puts together a deal to produce a new Barbie movie with Mattel. Mattel is trying to create a new brand for their toys and new means to sell the toys, of course. So Margot Robbie picks up the role. Right off the bat, we have this whole brand new Barbie that we know we're going to get in, I would argue, probably some of the best casting you could have ever imagined. There was actually apparently a minute between Amy Schumer and Margot Robbie where Anne Hathaway was being looked at.
Oh, wow.
She would have been great, too.
She would have. However, what I really love about Margot Robbie in this is that she personally sought out Greta Gerwig herself.
And that's the next point I was going to say, is that Margot Robbie actually sought out Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig to write this script, the Oscar-nominated screenwriting couple and indie darlings. And Noah Baumbach, of course, is responsible for such films as Marriage Story, the Meyerowitz Stories Before and After, and the recent White Noise on Netflix. Greta Gerwig at this time had a fair number of acting credits. Moving forward to the point we got here, where she has now written and directed two critically acclaimed Oscar-nominated films in Lady Bird and Little Women. So this is the studio debut for Greta Gerwig. And this is what we end up getting is you give an indie auteur and an art house director the Barbie IP, and I don't think I've seen a more existential movie since Cloud Atlas.
The writing is somehow very intelligent and snappy, and it has a lot of points to make. I really connected with this movie. I really loved what the movie was saying, and considering we're not really going into spoilers.
Light spoilers.
Light spoilers, okay. So with the Barbie movie, I find that it really shows the line between the reality of the world and the dream Barbie was selling. When I was a child, Barbie was a doctor, a president, an astronaut. Barbie could do all of these things. But then going into the real world after you've been given a toy to live out your dreams, and it's not like that. It's not like the dream that the toy company is selling. It's not like the movies. And having to navigate that while still keeping your idealism and hope for the world and hope that you can do things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really drives a huge theme of that. And what I find kind of crazy is that there's almost an inverse of these themes in Oppenheimer. So what I want to point out, the Oppenheimer Barbie double feature concept was something created by the internet. So as I was saying earlier, Warner Brothers took this personally, ended up moving their film that was supposed to release this weekend, which was Coyote versus Acme, starring John Cena, and Will Forte, which was supposed to come out this weekend. It's been pushed further down the line. They ended up putting forward one of the biggest tent poles of the year, Barbie, against Oppenheimer. And the internet went wild. It was a period of time where we gotta have this mindset of one of these is obviously going to shift. One of these is obviously going to move. But the internet hype behind this was already starting to become a thing long before this last month. They were already looking at shifting shifting release dates for things like a few months ago, and they even made the point that Barbie will not move, and the Universal made the point that Oppenheimer will not move. I think Universal was doing that because they had a deal in place with Christopher Nolan when they first actually signed on the movie about release windows, stuff like that. But that was Warner Brothers very much trying to be like, no, we're sticking it to Nolan. And I think they also saw the money in this, though. I think they saw the internet hype. We haven't seen this level of internet hype ever. Some people are trying to use the Snakes on a Plane comparison. It's from 2006. Back in 2006, you had what? MySpace and what else? MSN 2006? What? I don't remember what we had, but we had MySpace. We know that. But that's where a lot of the stuff about Snakes on a Plane was coming through. Now, obviously, for that one, we know.
MSN Messenger?
Yeah, MSN Messenger. And so, obviously, we know from back then that did not translate the way to actual box office dollars the way they thought they was going to do, which I think is another reason why this entire phenomenon to do with the double feature of two wildly different movies has created such a stir, because as we saw from this weekend at the box office, like, these movies are doing gangbusters right now, and I think it's the first time that we can actually recognize an internet meme being one of the driving factors.
What I really like about this is the outcome of this is very wholesome. It's people working together. Like, as long as, ever since I was young, I've loved both Star Wars and Star Trek, and I've always had people say, you can't like both. You have to pick one. There's always been a culture of pitting IPs against each other, and it's almost ridiculous pitting Oppenheimer against Barbie because they're vastly, vastly different movies. But what I love is that the internet said, no, we're going to make it a double feature because both of these look great, and you're comparing apples to oranges.
And that's the thing. So now all of a sudden you have these two wildly different kind of fan bases going in and making it better for both films. Like, I'm looking at the box office right now, and Barbie has made its money back in its first weekend. And I don't think we've seen movies in general do that for a while, unless they're at the budget of something like a horror film with like 20 million or less, right? Mm-hmm. Which actually, on that note, I want to point out, Lionsgate, what are you doing? You had Cobweb, an original IP, well-received horror film, come out this weekend against one of the biggest media movie moments of the year. Why was there a horror movie with Lizzie Kaplan, Cobweb, great movie? People should check it out. Why was it not released in October of this year? That's another conversation for another day. But
spooky movies for Halloween.
Spooky movies for Halloween, hashtag. What I would say, though, is that Barbie, for instance, had a budget of $145 million, which I also want to point out, too. We have a lot of discussions about bloated budgets and stuff like that. I think the set design alone in Barbie is where a lot of that money went.
Definitely.
If you haven't seen this movie, these sets are brilliantly built. Like, they're reminiscent of the big era of big Hollywood, from the era of Cleopatra and Ben-Hur and stuff like that. That's the scale of which they're building Barbie world to me. And at least to a modern concept, it has that beautiful artificialness I think Greta Gerwig actually mentioned on a YouTube video recently on the Letterboxd watch list. But I'm watching this right now. $145 million for the budget, opening weekend worldwide, and I guarantee you this has at least partially to do with the Barbenheimer phenomenon. $337 million worldwide. Domestic alone was 155, so already covering their budget before marketing from domestic alone. First weekend that happened. Who would have been? And that, on top of that too, you have Oppenheimer. Same thing. We have a 3-hour talk-heavy 3-hour biopic that just came out, a historical biopic that just came out with a budget of $100 million, and its opening weekend worldwide it made $174 million. You can say all you want about this being Christopher Nolan, but that's a 3-hour talk-heavy biopic that they just got hordes of, like, young, impressionable people to go see. I think this is one of those situations where you literally had the entree and the dessert, and both were of high-ass quality.
Absolutely. And what we've talked a fair bit about Barbie so far, but switching back to Oppenheimer, what I really liked is even though this is a historical movie, the way that Christopher Nolan pieced it together and like his use of sound design and basically just the complexity of how this entire project came together and all of the factors in it, there were parts that felt like a plot twist, even though I know what's happened.
Yeah, exactly, right? And on top of that, too, like, he edits this movie, like, the way he cuts and writes and edits this movie, I don't think any scene in Oppenheimer was longer than, like, a minute long. Like, every single one was very short, to the point, got you moving. Like, a movie that mostly discusses science and technobabble and politics and all that should not feel like it has the intensity of a disaster movie or an action film. But, like, you're finding yourself not being able to pull away from the screen on this. That's what I found fascinating about that. And to counter that, too, like, with this whole double feature concept, where it came to Oppenheimer, there's actually themes between Oppenheimer and Barbie that I think are a lot more connected than people tend to think. Your place in the world, what you've done for the people around you, what the world sees you as, and what it wants to put you as. And it's like, obviously, this is purely about coincidence, but I do think there's actually similarities between the stories of both Barbie and J. Robert Oppenheimer in these two movies. I mean, Barbie was a far more existential movie than I would have expected.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Who was your favorite Barbie?
Oh, my favorite Barbie. I know who your favorite Barbie was.
I love Weird Barbie. I'm a huge Kate McKinnon fan.
Yeah.
I definitely had a Weird Barbie as a child that may or may not have been a circus performer with paint in their hair.
Yeah, you did.
When I was a child and I played with Barbies, I would take handkerchiefs and tape strange space queen outfits on them and perform space operas in my living room. My mother would buy me normal Barbies, then walk into my bedroom and just kind of shake her head at me. I think she was probably thinking, like, what have you done to the toys, child?
Yeah. What I will say is about the Barbie movie, Margot Robbie was stellar as what they refer to in the movie as stereotypical Barbie.
Oh, yes.
I love that they literally just say stereotypical Barbie. But my God, Ryan Gosling in this movie. Yeah.
Beach Ken.
He's Beach Ken.
He can't even surf.
He can't even surf. He's not trained for that. He's beach. That's his job.
He's not even lifeguard, Ken.
No, a mistake people consistently make. No, Ryan Gosling in this movie was next level. People were saying a lot that this is actually an Oscar-worthy performance from him, and I actually am inclined to agree.
100%.
Completely. And what I find kind of crazy is the internet's gone berserk. The right wing have gone berserk over this whole anti-man accusation about Barbie. And I'm here to actually say, first off, I think anytime you hear anti-man accusations in movies, you got to take a look at who the hell's saying it. Secondly, I would argue this movie is actually the opposite of that. And this movie seems to celebrate, gender freedom regardless of back and forth. It seems to celebrate more just the concept of individuality.
I would also argue that a lot of the anti-man themes in this movie aren't necessarily, all of the men are bad or all of the men are toxic. It reads to me more like what a 12-year-old boy or a young boy would think if he picked up a book on the patriarchy.
And that's the whole thing.
With a very simple understanding of it.
Ryan Gosling here isn't supposed to be the red-pilled Andrew Tate type. He's the weak, confused 12-year-old boy, 16-year-old boy who just got hooked on Andrew Tate. That's what he is. And that's what I think a lot of people are really missing out on, is that even the whole point with Ken in this, along with Barbie doesn't need to be what people tell her she is. She wants to be, she says at that one point, I want to be the one imagining. I don't want to be the item, right? That may have been a spoiler, but I'm going to leave that in. But, you have Ken, same thing, where it's just like, he is so pushed by and moved by what he sees men are supposed to be like, where he's now fallen into that toxic trap constantly that many men do fall into, where they see themselves as, oh, you're only a man based on the woman you have access to, by the image you put forward, by how masculine you are, how many brewski beers you drink.
I would also argue that within this movie, I actually feel very bad for Ken. It's kind of seems to me like a reverse Adam and Eve situation where Ken was created for Barbie. Like Ken's whole design and mentality, he was Barbie's boyfriend and then just best friend.
Yeah.
After they broke up in 2016, I believe.
Yeah, 2016, 2018, something like that.
And then we didn't see Blaine. Unfortunately, no. Blaine, the surfer guy that she got with after Ken. But what I would say is Ken doesn't have a lot of like core to himself. He has no idea who he is. He was designed to be Barbie's accessory. I understand what they were doing with the toxic masculinity thing, because if you don't have a base of knowing who you are, it's very easy to fall for, unless everybody meets in the middle and can actually listen to each other's perspective. And it goes both ways. There is inequality in both genders in different areas. And let's be honest, the system isn't fair in really any way. Sometimes one gets it better, sometimes the other doesn't. And just because one side is hurting, it doesn't mean the other side isn't hurting in similar yet different ways. There's a lot of contradictions in society, and I can understand why people would get angry and upset. I can see how if you're a young boy, you're trying to basically give yourself some power in the world, how you could get onto these toxic notions, but it doesn't help us become better as people. Subjugating another person doesn't make it better.
The way that Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach were able to actually tackle that wave of disaffected young youth that going into these very problematic and oftentimes very dangerous mindsets was highly portrayed in this movie in a way that I thought was very effective. Literally, he was disaffected. He learned about how men should be in charge. Nobody sees the quotations I'm putting in that statement, by the way. But quote unquote men in charge, all that. He brought that back to Barbie Land immediately because he felt this is the solution to my sadness.
And you do definitely see why Ken is sad. He doesn't have any sense of self.
Yeah.
And I think also with the Barbie movie, it's not just the Andrew Tate stuff, but it's the way people have to navigate the world with its complexities. And I find that it does a very good job of showing how frustrating it is to try and be perfect all the time.
Yeah, actually, I'd say that for sure.
Regardless of the toxic masculinity in the movie, it's everyone there has to be perfect all the time. And if you're not perfect, you get ostracized, which is why I love the Kate McKinnon Weird Barbie.
Yeah.
I was a weird kid, so I was entirely ostracized, but I was the weird kid.
I just want to point out the running gag in this movie of every time Barbie sees Weird Barbie, just like it's shocked or spooked, was so funny to me every single time. Just how Kate McKinnon portrayed it is just like, yeah, there's the reaction. See, it happens every time, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, she just knows what the world's really like, and she's like, you guys don't get it yet.
So I want to go back to the double feature concept. What do you feel? This has been one of the biggest weekends in movies since at least Top Gun Maverick, and I believe this one might have even beat Top Gun in its box office. What do you feel was a big driving factor behind this moment? We went to go see Barbie, and that was, and I'm not exaggerating here, that was the first time we've been in a theater since before the pandemic, where every single theater seat was sold. Every single one. And I have not seen that for any movie that we've seen since the pandemic.
So many people dressed in pink.
Dressed in pink. And what I love about it is that you can tell these people I saw some similar people, the same ones that we were in Oppenheimer at earlier. And so what is it about this double feature concept that's bringing people to the theaters? What do we think is going to happen with studios? Are they going to try to replicate this? Is it going to be something that, are they going to learn the wrong lessons about this? Are they going to start being like, oh, what audience wants is two extremes and that's it? Or are they going to learn that you got to let the audience, draw into things that are going to be unique and creative? And, Barbie was an incredibly unique film.
Regardless of if the studios learn this lesson, I think Mattel has learned this lesson because they've greenlit how many projects now?
They've learned a lesson. So Mattel's projects, like the next one that we're getting is that Barney movie from Daniel Kaluuya that he's comparing to an A24 surrealist horror. And now they've put forward, I think it was announced they put forward like 45 things are in development now from Mattel. And I mean, many years ago, Deadpool came out. The first Deadpool movie did really great in theaters. And James Gunn had an article online talking about how he loved the movie, but he fears that Hollywood is going to draw the wrong message from it. And he says the message they're going to get is that R-rated vulgarity is what sells. And he's like, what they should be drawing from this is to allow and trust your audience to enjoy comic accurate things. Trust your audience to be able to hear an F word every so often, or see something a little bit bloody and sexual and not have it turn off the whole movie to them, even within that genre. And I'm thinking about that now, and I think, we don't want to suddenly get to the point where it's like an art house David Lynchian movie from like 1993 or something like that. Like, I love David Lynch, but what I'm saying though is that, like, I don't want to see a movie in the vein of like Mulholland Drive and suddenly see a trailer for that, have it be the weirdest thing ever, just for it at the end to be like, coming this summer, hungry hippos. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be, that's the lesson I'm kind of worried they're going to take from this.
Yes.
Because not everything is going to need the same treatment. And we see this time and time again. 3D after Avatar, cinematic universe after Marvel, sequels in the 80s for horror, remakes for horror in the late 2000s. Like, this is what I'm saying though, is like we're going to see a situation, unfortunately, where some studios are not going to learn. I'm hoping that Mattel has learned the right lesson here, because they actually have quite a toy box to play with if they're letting artists actually be in creative control.
A literal toy box.
A literal toy box. I know, I was very careful about that terminology.
I would also say that I hope that this doesn't just become the next MCU, because when Iron Man 3 came out and we started getting more comic book movies, and I'm such a huge fan of comic book movies. I was reading X-Men. I was a kid. I never thought I'd live in a world where I got to see all of these crazy comic book characters in real life with the effects they have. Yeah. However, it is undeniable that we are oversaturated with comic book movies and big and that kind of thing now. So
sorry, go on.
So I just don't want to see the industry inundated with only this. I think we should, as an industry, and when we're making movies, we should go forward and be creative and try things, because if all we're doing is copying the latest success.
Yeah. I mean, we had about a 5-year period or 3-year period here where multiverse has been the big hot word. And that's primarily between, well, I was going to say primarily between Marvel, but in reality, Marvel, DC, Sony, Marvel, and A24 all did it with Everything Everywhere All at Once. But I would be fair to say I'm not going to put the A24 one in that same bubble. That was completely written outside of trying to chase a trend. But, the Barbie, you are right. Like, what's going to happen is studios are looking for the next tentpole for them to live off of. That Marvel's holding off X-Men for a while. We still don't know when X-Men is going to happen, because they know that they only have certain amount of cards they have left to pull. We're seeing DC, DC has had a number of issues, and we're about to see if James Gunn can flip that, which I'm sure he will, actually. I'm looking forward to Superman Legacy. But now I think what we're going to get into is exactly this. I think our more straightforward tentpoles are going to be video game adaptations after things like Super Mario Brothers and Last of Us. And I can see this being the direction where you start having a lot more auteurs try to do their studio debuts, because you're going to have all these indie people being like, what's this? Hasbro is going to let me do a G.I. Joe movie that's actually a movie about the PTSD and the effects on war of wartime veterans? All right, sounds great. You know what I mean? Like, I think we're going to start seeing that more often. Now, what you're saying, but they're going to have to be careful, because they got to make sure that we're not going to just turn these fantastic scripts into an opportunity to sell, and sometimes give the script that doesn't have the IP budget.
Yeah.
But then the argument could be made. Barbie did just come out. It came out this past weekend, did incredibly well. There's a lot of arguments being made online about if we made more movies starring women with female empowerment views, we'd be seeing more women go to the theaters. And the unfortunate truth is Joyride just flopped, which is exactly that. Joyride just flopped. No Hard Feelings, different movie, but it was a female lead still. And it's like, regardless, so these are the sorts of things where I'm like, these statements come out constantly. You constantly hear people talk about like, oh, all it ever is remakes and sequels. And it's like, and I hate when people say that, because they don't they don't know anything coming out past Star Wars and Marvel and Fast and the Furious. It's crazy to me how often people who describe themselves as movie fans, all that, have a complete like shelter watershed for anything under a certain level of notoriety.
But having said that, we shouldn't disparage people calling themselves movie fans and say that they're less than because they haven't seen the same things as us.
That's probably just my own pretentious movie nerdness coming out.
That's not fair.
That's not fair. That's biased. But
everyone should enjoy the movies they like, regardless of other people.
What I was saying, and that's not what I'm saying though. What I'm saying is when people are talking about how there's only this coming out, because they would call themselves like movie fans and all that, but then encapsulate themselves off at a certain point. They don't even know 90% of what's in theaters. People will make arguments as if it's definitive. That's all sequels, remakes, this, that. Well, it's like, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. Last year alone, the movies with the most legs ended up being original IPs.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like, and that's kind of what I was surprised about. Like, when the conversation comes about Barbie, I bring up Joyride. People haven't seen Joyride. And people talk about, oh, all good movies nowadays are just blockbuster stuff. And I'll bring up, last year, one movie I liked in particular was a movie called Fall. It's not everyone's sin, but people are talking about like there's no original things anymore. It's like this was a perfectly simple movie that has no explosions or anything and kept the intensity up like crazy, and nobody's seeing it except I think people actually. And that became like a huge Netflix hit though later on. It didn't do well in its original run. It goes on Netflix. I think Netflix is producing a sequel now. But now, as a perfect example, going back to Oppenheimer on this one too, is that what I'm hoping is Hollywood is going to learn a lesson from Barbie, but I'm also hoping they learn a lesson from Oppenheimer. And I'm hoping that lesson is give us movies like this in theaters again. Give us ensemble casts talking about things that have happened. Give us ensemble casts just acting their hearts out. I saw this movie had one of those stacked casts I've seen since Dune. Both of them did. Had one of those stacked casts I've seen since Dune. But I would say between the two of them, Oppenheimer, Barbie had great performances, especially from Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie, Rhea Perlman. Fantastic performances. With Oppenheimer, I would argue that of the main 5-6 people, you can give each one of them a supporting actor nominee. Like,
that's true.
I haven't seen Robert Downey Jr. act like this since like the first Iron Man.
And what I also really like about Oppenheimer is none of the characters are perfect. There's no good or bad guys. Everyone is very shades of gray and nuanced. And there's no there's definitely talks of like moral ethics in that. But like as you're watching everything unfold, I can understand how it happened the way it did.
Yeah.
With all of the factors in there. If you just look at the whole thing, you could say building that bomb was wrong. But then you look at the current political climate, you look at the way the government was, you look at...
And I actually want to use that segue to kind of open up another point about this, because part of this episode is not just talking about the movies, we're talking about the phenomenon behind this double feature. I want to talk about, there's been a recent uptick I've noticed. I am a decidedly very left-wing person. I'm open about that online. I'm very open talking about that. But what I will say is, whereas you have the right going berserk over Barbie, calling it anti-man, calling it, oh my God, it's woke. And it's, first of all, somebody define woke to me, please. But when it comes to Oppenheimer, I'm seeing a huge...
This engine is woke.
This engine is woke. Everything I don't like is woke. But yeah, Donald Trump is woke. Let's see how that goes. What I find interesting, though, with Oppenheimer is we're seeing a similar outrage from a lot of the left on Oppenheimer, saying that they're trying to glorify the atom bomb, that it should have been from the perspective of Japanese people. It should have been, I don't want anything to do with Nazis or anything like that. And what I find crazy about the movie, you don't see a single Nazi in the whole movie. Japan is... I'll just make this point clear. If you want to see something about Japan from the perspective for the atom bomb, there's an incredibly heartbreaking movie called Grave of the Fireflies.
Bring tissues.
Bring tissues and buckle up, because if that's the movie that you keep saying you want to watch, go watch Grave of the Fireflies, then tell me how you feel after. And
I also believe there's several movies in Japan from a Japanese perspective.
Yeah.
Of this very thing. So
there's also a fantastic, super, super harrowing movie from the early 90s called Threads, which was a movie about the after effects of a fallout of a nuclear blast. And it was a harrowing movie. Devastating stuff. Beautiful film. But Oppenheimer wasn't about that.
No.
Oppenheimer was a film about a guy who had political leanings that are at odds with the very governance that funds his desires to try to increase the scientific achievement. You have some of the best scientists in all of America working together on this. Like, are you trying? And you have America trying to, demonize the head of this after they already got what they wanted out of him. And then, he's trying to fight with the AEC to help atomic energy move forward, electronic energy move forward, and he's just being shut down at every single point. This movie is not about some harbinger of death who brought forward the end of all this world. This movie is about a scientific, what happens when the scientific mind and the people who have these gifted abilities, what happens when those in charge, those who want power, those who want money, and those who want war, use them up and spit them out. Like, a perfect example is Robert Downey Jr. in this whole movie, Louis Strauss. And I feel a little better talking about this one because this is all history. But Louis Strauss is a good example of somebody who, you see in the movie, he truly thought that all of Oppenheimer's motivations were to target him. All of his things were for these illusions of grandeur and all that. And you had the other side, the governance of it all, trying to say, oh, all Oppenheimer wants is to feed secrets to the Soviets and all this stuff, because he had left-wing leanings, which at the time were enough for people to not be considered as part of, like, the Manhattan Project, as they say in this. Having left-wing liberal values at this time was not considered an American trait.
Yeah.
And crazy to think how we are nowadays in comparison, how much more mainstream left-wing views have become. But that's what this movie's about. It's not about this guy harbinging death. It's about this person who got run through the system to do something that he was so distracted by the achievement and the goal of the scientific mind. So what you end up having is this guy who's been run through the system and chewed up and spat out. And what I find kind of crazy is how anybody can see this movie and think to themselves, oh, this is glorifying violence. This is glorifying death. And he has that line where he's like, I have become death, harbinger of worlds. I can't remember what the exact line is, but he has that line when he sees the bomb, and you can see that that's the exact moment that he just clued into what they just put onto the world.
Yes. I also love that Christopher Nolan used the same effect behind him that they used for Scarecrow.
Yeah, it was a fun little thing, right? When he's doing, he's inside that meeting with all the people, and he's doing the celebration thing with all the scientists, and you see the effects start rumbling behind it. It was the same thing for the fear talks in his Batman Begins, also by Cillian Murphy. That was a really cool little throwback to Nolan's own movie. And the thing is, like, this is what I'm kind of talking about, though, when people are politicizing whether or not to even see the movie, which has been a big thing happening recently. I've been finding with a lot of movies that have been coming out, like Sound of Freedom was an example of one recently that kind of had a similar political hijinks behind it.
Yeah.
Not going to get into that. Anybody can look up Sound of Freedom to know anything that's been going on with that one. But when it comes to Oppenheimer, I feel like, especially when we're in today's day and age where we just got out of the pandemic and we've seen how governance looks at science and treats them. So for people to decide not to see a movie that truly is on the side of listen to the scientists.
Yeah.
It blows me away that in this day and age, as people try to say through some sort of standing that they wouldn't see the movie based on these reasons. I think the double feature in itself is going to draw a lot more people towards us, and I'm really open for more movies like this, because I think there's a whole world of historical events that we can be seeing in these styles again. Like, I want to see more movies like All the President's Men. I want to see more movies like JFK. I want to see more movies like Born on the 4th of July. I want to see more movies like Patton or All Quiet on the Western Front, which actually was a fantastic remake that came out last year. But I want more of these movies where you just have actors coming in. You have the benefit of, you were saying earlier how none of these characters in Oppenheimer are necessarily one side or the other, good or bad. And I think that is a huge benefit you get from adapting history, is that people are not good or bad. Everyone's morally great, except for maybe Keanu Reeves.
I will just say his wife does not love her children.
Oh, man, Kitty Oppenheimer, who was played fantastically by Emily Blunt, by the way. She had 3 jobs there. Drink up, hate them kids, and tell Oppenheimer to nut up, and she did all 3 perfectly.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, even though she's playing an American, I would never want Emily Blunt to give me a scathing look. It's so angrily English.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
She says something with her eyes and no handshake. that is more scathing than any, like, all caps screaming could ever do.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. Now, on a technical standpoint, you brought up the little point about Oppenheimer with the vibrating effect in the background. I want to point out, too, the actual cinematography of this movie was outstanding.
Oh, absolutely.
And I will argue that it was outstanding in both Oppenheimer and Barbie, because the Barbie director of photography was none other than Rodrigo Prieto, who did such films as Brokeback Mountain, The Wolf of Wall Street, Argo, and Babel, and is doing the upcoming Killers of the Flower Moon for Martin Scorsese, also did The Irishman. This is the guy they got to shoot Barbie. And it shows hard.
What I also loved about Barbie is it was obviously about Barbie, but there was so many influences. Like, I definitely saw the influences to, like, Singing in the Rain and old musical set pieces, and having it look kind of like a stage play in Barbie Land. It worked so well for that era. Fantastical.
Totally. That era of 50s musical movies absolutely laid its claim in that movie. And it's also kind of funny because it's not even the first time Margot Robbie has made a direct reference to these sorts of movies. In Birds of Prey, she has a moment where she does the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend bit from Marilyn Monroe from I believe A Star Is Born, or Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and it's so funny. I love when I see these kind of references to old school cinema and these sorts of things. And you know, I've seen In the Rain is a movie I particularly love. And anytime I can see a reference to it is always really nice. Yeah, I just this. What do you think happens going forward now with this? This phenomenon is so big. It's been recognized by the people from each film. Quentin Tarantino just posted pictures of himself this weekend buying tickets to both movies for a double feature. So, like, you know, the film bro of film bros is backing up Barbenheimer. And where do you see the future of this? Like, I have my own thoughts of where I see the future of where Hollywood's going to go after this. But I mean, we have our hopes for how things are going to go. But
I hope that companies can continue to take risks with their products, because hiring Greta Gerwig for this was a risk. That's not something.
And Noah Baumbach.
And Noah Baumbach. I'm just more familiar with Greta Gerwig. Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach. It wasn't a usual decision. I really hope that that Mattel can go forward and actually just create interesting IPs with their products.
And not just Mattel too. Like, and it doesn't have to be Mattel. It could be Mattel, Hasbro. Like, what's kind of interesting is,
and I want a Street Sharks movie personally, live action Street Sharks.
Do it. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola. What I will say though is I want them to be more creative, but it's actually indicative of a bigger thing happening in the industry right now. And I will point out, most of our episodes of Martini Window are often recorded a few weeks ahead of time or a couple weeks ahead of time. This episode is going to be out. This episode that you're listening to is only recorded within about 24 to 30 hours before we release it. So this is going to be a lot more current, but with the current effect going on with the industry right now, SAG, of course, recently announced their agreement with fully independent companies, stuff like that. The studio system is going through a bit of a unfolding at the moment, and this is all very, very similar to the early era of Hollywood, when the studio system started to fall, actors started getting left shoulder likenesses, United Artists was created, you had companies like Colgate suddenly doing like the Colgate Quality Special and stuff like that. The movie Hairspray does a good job parodying that kind of era of sponsored content like that. But I actually kind of feel like weirdly we're in this new era that we're going to go into now of exactly this, like a new era of sponsored content where it's like, it's, you know, it's a road trip comedy about a father and son who haven't seen themselves in ages, but it's also kind of an A24 style indie drama. Anyways, go and see the new, I don't know, tic-tac-toe movie. That's not a game. I understand that. Connect 4.
I want to see a gritty movie about the reality of the people who were hired to be the Coca-Cola family in the ad.
I think there's a decent movie in there somewhere. So this is exactly the way you should be thinking. This is exactly how people should think about it. If you had something like that, Coca-Cola want to make a movie about the Coca-Cola family, you get somebody who can make some sort of interesting Truman Show type situation or something like that, or make some sort of weird, you know, the Keeping Up with the Joneses type movie or something like that. Like, I guess that's my whole mindset is like, I'm really hoping that even if it means that we're entering some era of sponsored cinema again, sponsored content again, if it can offer the opportunity for people to tell certain stories with the budgets necessary to do so, I guess I'm of the mindset of I'm like, it's at least original stories.
It's true. And it's very interesting. I had no idea where we're going to go from here. Like many points in history and time, it could go one way or the other.
Yeah.
People could learn the wrong lessons. People could learn the right lessons. Some people could learn the right lessons and some people could learn the wrong lessons. And this is just my personal opinion. Who's to say that the thing that I think are the right lessons are?
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a very interesting time going forward, but it's definitely going to be, at least until everything gets sorted out, we're going to get a lot of creative films because we're not going to have blockbusters. And speaking of, historical biopics, I would love to see anybody do a Marilyn Monroe biopic where they actually talk about how she helped actors get their rights to their movies.
She helped take down the studio system. Like, how is this not the movie that we've been hearing, that we've been listening to every single time?
She was such an intelligent person. She took back power over herself.
Yeah.
And so even if it's not about her, let's just have a movie about how SAG got started.
Yeah, I mean, the actors strike from I think that was the 1960s.
Yeah,
I think it was the 60s because I know Leonard Nimoy took part of those.
Yeah, it's been long enough.
Isn't it weird that that's how I earmark it? I was like, well, I know Leonard Nimoy took part in there, so it must have been around the 60s. Like, yeah, and what I will say though with this is like, I'm hoping studios might take the right lessons. I'm hoping that the right lessons are things like don't try to go grimdark. Don't try to. I want the lessons for them to learn to be, if you're going to give IP to an artist, allow the artist to be an artist.
Absolutely.
Because I would argue the Barbie movie is just as much as it kind of puts a mirror to what Barbie's actually done in life, I would argue it's also very celebratory of Barbie as a character and as a item in pop culture. Like, that movie does not decry Barbie. It's actually quite a good commercial for Barbie, no less.
Within the Barbie movie, you have a mother and daughter, and the daughter is very nihilistic. She's like, oh, Barbie is just like a sex symbol giving us unrealistic expectations for our body. So you actually do get that voice. You do have a teenage voice who is a young girl now who should be the target of Barbie, who is not influenced by her at all and sees everything about her as a negative because of the world she lives in now. And then you have her mother who grew up on Barbie, and Barbie helped her have dreams. Yeah. And it's very interesting seeing both those perspectives.
I totally agree. Like, it shows that perspective. I don't think you can make this movie without, I don't think Barbie's a movie they can make without pointing out the fact that there's a lot of people who don't like Barbie. I mean, what was it? One of the first lines from the narrator in the movie is, Barbie was then created, and then all problems with feminism and equality were solved for the rest of the time. Like, it's just something like that. And by the way, Helen Mirren as a narrator of this was an amazing choice.
Absolutely.
Helen Mirren narrates the Barbie movie. Great choice, great casting. 100 points to Greta Gerwig on that. So, going to Oppenheimer, though, even on that, like, and the same thing, I want to be able to see more of these movies that are not afraid to take history and shoot them in a way that doesn't feel like you're watching some educational film from school, right? Like, he's making very creative choices in Oppenheimer during the hearing scene where his history with Jean Tatlock is revealed, and the camera pans over, and suddenly it's all metaphorical, but you see a naked Cillian Murphy in the room with like Florence Pugh's Jean Tatlock on him, stuff like that, Tatlock. The way that they showed that, though, to show exactly how Emily Blunt is envisioning this now. And then even just the shot before Jean Tatlock's there and he's naked in front of everyone, because in that moment, it's like, in that moment, it's just Oppenheimer is bearing all in front of everyone. And it's like, there's elements here that, movies from like 30 years ago are not going to try taking these more artistic approaches to moments in these sorts of films.
That's true.
And I want to see two things. I want to see proper budgets given towards things that are historical, that are not that are not these, Hollywood style MCU blockbuster films, which I love, and I see all of them because I am an absolute petulant for the cinema. But I see them all, and that's great. But I would love to see more of these because I've seen Oppenheimer twice now, and both times I've walked out with a new set of thoughts. Going out of Barbenheimer or going out of Oppenheimer into Barbie, there's actually a lot of carryover thoughts about Oppenheimer that also, weirdly enough, got addressed in Barbie. Which is so strange to me because, like, this is a moment in movie history that only happens organically. And another problem is that you're going to start getting a lot of studios trying to manufacture what just happened with Barbenheimer.
Yeah, I can see that, and I can see them being disappointed when it doesn't work because this was an organic thing the internet did. That's the point of the internet. You can't just manufacture it.
Yeah.
You can advertise, but like people really have to pick it up. And within Oppenheimer, with the way that it was shot, we both noticed this, and I've seen online that other people didn't. The hand on the back of Jean's head.
Yes.
When she was going into the tub.
So this is a big point, and this will be a big spoiler for Oppenheimer, but this is also a historical thing. Warning, warning, warning. Big spoiler here for Oppenheimer. So Jean Tatlock, played by Florence Pugh. She's in a situation of Oppenheimer's left saying, I can never talk to you again, blah, blah, blah. And she goes and the perception of the audience and history killed herself because in real life, Jean Tatlock's actual death certificate is listed as suicide. However, in the movie, you are correct, Kayla. In the movie, Christopher Nolan basically said, we all know that's not what happened. And there's that moment where you see the black glove covered hand push her head under the water and pull the hand back out. And you are right. For whatever reason, on the internet, I do not see anyone pointing out this black hand. That was him pointing out, like, black glove hand. That was Nolan pointing out, we all know she got killed by the people following Oppenheimer. We all know that. You know what I mean? He was being watched due to his supposed communist interests, literally goes to a known communist's home, leaves her. She knows he's part of the Manhattan Project. We all know what happened. And I want to point out, Gailey, I'm glad you said that because somebody's going to start pointing this out because that was a fantastic way to put it out in there and never mention it again in the movie.
Yeah. What I really liked about Oppenheimer is Christopher Nolan was able to add all of these details without having to spoon feed it to you. He lets you be an intelligent audience and notice things.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if I rewatch when I rewatch the movie, I will see many things I didn't see before from the first time because it's such a dense movie with so much detail.
Yeah.
And I really loved it for that reason. I like that it's not a black and white story.
It's not the buzzer, black and white.
In theme.
I think I figured out what that was too, by the way. People were talking in the past about how the black and white color, it's supposed to be when it's before the bomb and after the bomb and all this. And I was thinking about that. I don't think it's before and after. I think because there's elements where they showed color bits that would have happened after the bomb and stuff like that, right? What I think it was is, and anybody who's listening, please correct me if I'm wrong. What I gathered was every single time it was in color, it was from the perspective, from the part of the story that was from the perspective of scientific drive and seeing the full spectrum of what's going on and what's to come. Everything in black and white was always scenes of trying to shut it down. It had to do with the capitalist nature or the government's nature. I noticed that. So anytime that was black and white, it was when the focus of science was not the focus of the movie. Does that kind of make sense?
That does make sense. It's also very metaphorical in that, like you have a lot of CEOs or politicians, and when your goal is like money or when your goal is power, because let's be honest, people get into positions of power because they want power, and power does corrupt people naturally.
Yes.
And so I think it's very interesting that a lot of the time people in power who will like, yeah, war, we'll get more money from this, see everything in black and white. They don't see the nature of it.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's exactly it. They saw it all in black and white. They saw it all, well, you built the bomb, so you should have been okay with it, right? If you weren't okay with it, why'd you build the bomb? It's like, that's not how life works. It's not always that, you know, you wouldn't have done it if you had the morality complex behind it. It's, you know, that big hearing they have them. And it's like, you would have done it if you had the morality complex. Yes, it did. You guys went into this already targeting this guy, saying that he was somehow capable of treason.
Yeah.
You think this is going to be the guy that's going to suddenly walk away from the project with all the information that you guys have, that you gave him? No. He was set up to fail. He was set up to fail. And there's that beautiful line, there's that beautiful conversation between him and Einstein where he says, oh, they're going to, then they're going to use you up and never talk to you again until many years. They'll give you an award and they'll shake your hand and they'll say, all is forgiven. But that's not for you. It's not forgiven. It's for them. They're forgiving themselves. And that is a fucking poignant scene in that movie. And I love it. And man, there's so much to take in with these two movies. It's actually kind of crazy. I'm glad we did this Barbenheimer double feature episode because I hope someone chooses Oppenheimer in the future. I hope someone chooses Barbie in the future. But I knew I needed to talk about this as it was happening. Because I think these two movies take on a couple things that are actually very, very, very prominent in our world right now. And what I find crazy is it's a very rare feat that you have two movies of this exceptional quality, of this weird marriage of Barbenheimer that the internet's created, where you have the opportunity to both see the folly of man as well as man's folly in the current day, which is what we've done to women in the real world and what we've done to scientists in that world up to now. And I think there's that's my mindset on this whole thing, and I think it's actually quite beautiful the internet's turned this into such a phenomenon, because I think the discussion this is going to bring up is going to precede a lot of what we think are just going to happen in the box office. I think the effect of this is going to be a lot bigger than we expect.
And I would say that anyone who is upset about the ending of Barbie, it is making a statement about what humans do whenever there's a big hullabaloo.
Yeah. About
rights.
Yeah.
Then we go back to barely anything and give them robes and platitudes. And anybody who is going to be upset about like, oh, well, the Kens never got justice, blah, 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 blah. The Barbie land is the direct opposite of the real world.
Yeah.
The whole point of the movie is when the real world gets better, so will Barbie land.
And Barbie is at a point in her life where she does not want to cater to... I'm not going to say that part. People can go watch the movie.
Go watch the movie.
This has been a very special episode of the Martini Window. We hope to do more of these sporadically as time goes on when the situation calls for it. This was a very specific moment in movie history that we wanted to make sure to talk about. We've been excited about it for a long time. We've been excited for the Barbie movie for a long time, and Oppenheimer. It was fantastic seeing these two in a double feature. If you have the opportunity, I absolutely recommend doing it. If Barbie is sold out and Oppenheimer is sold out, Joyride is still in theaters. And highly think people should go see Joyride, because we don't see movies like this often in theaters anymore. Thank you to everybody for listening. On our description, on our link, we have a link to Barbenheimer t-shirts. Get it while it's hot. Kayla, anything to go out on?
Go watch Barbenheimer.
Correct. All right, Oppenheimer, let's go party.